to Fruity Knitting. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Madeline, and this is episode 123. Fruity Knitting is a 90-minute program bringing you knitting inspiration from around the world, as well as some extra snippets of travel, history, and storytelling that we hope adds joy to your life and brings a smile to your face.
Yes, and we recently returned from our month-long trip around the UK, where we were interviewing guests and gathering new content for the show. And while we were away, we also produced a travel vlog, which is a collage of behind-the-scenes footage showing you some of the people we interviewed and some of the places that we visited. And many people have commented that they particularly enjoyed the vlog because it gives them an insider view of our work, and they get to see what happens behind a polished interview in a more personal or intimate way. So if you haven't yet seen the vlog, we recommend that you check it out. It's called UK Travel Vlog 2022. Very obvious name. And we're featuring one of our UK interviews today, and that's with the designer Georgia Farrell. And Georgia's designs have been heavily featured in the Rowan magazines, and there's a lot of excitement there about her talent as a young upcoming designer. I was really impressed with Georgia, everything from her obvious talent and passion to her work ethic and communication skills. She was such a joy to work with. So it is a long interview, and we've divided it into two parts. In part one, Georgia talks about how she translates her passion for modern architecture into stitch patterns, and we go through her book, My London. And then in part two, which is at the end of the episode, Georgia gives us a mini workshop on how to use colours and patterns to create the illusion of depth or volume in our knitting, and also how to substitute colours in any design. So my aim for every interview is that the knitters will learn something new that they can directly apply to their own knitting. And I think this interview with Georgia really does it, so I hope you enjoy it.
Yep, and while we were travelling, each of us finished a new project. So we took the opportunity to film ourselves modelling them in the picturesque seaside town of Hastings. That's included in today's episode. And there's another short psychology segment in which I talk about the big fish, little pond effect and how it applies to us knitters. So that's our program for today. Mum is wearing the beautiful Corba sweater, so I think we should start with Bring and Brag.
Yes, so this is the design by Natasha Hornby. It's called the Corba sweater. And when I saw a picture of this on Instagram, I knew immediately that I had to knit it. It just stood out as being particularly eye-catching. It was elegant and feminine and all of those things that I love, but it also had the perfect silhouette that I love to wear. The sweater has a really unusual construction, but what's really interesting is that the design actually started off as a shawl, so you can also knit the Corba shawl. And when you know that, it's so much easier to understand how the sweater's constructed. So here's a picture of the Corba shawl, which is knitted in a thicker sports weight yarn. The Corba sweater is knitted in a fingering weight yarn. So it's a triangular shawl that's worked top down and from the centre out. And I absolutely love how the basket weave pattern morphs into a cabled diamond pattern with bobbles and then morphs back into the basket weave pattern again. So back to the Corba sweater, I've taken it off because I really need a hands-on approach to show you this genius construction. So holding the sweater up like this, just for now, forget about this V-neck line at the front. And if we hold the sleeves out of the sweater like that, you can see that it's made up of two triangular shawls. So across here and down at the front, that's one, and then turn it around, the same on the back here, like that. Hold your sleeve up a little bit higher, that's it. So you can kind of see straight across here, down and down. That's the second triangle. So you start at the centre back neck here and you cast on about 5 stitches, and you're going to work the basket weave pattern top down and from centre out, just like you would on a simple triangular shawl. And once you've got the width of the back neck here, you'll have a triangle about the shape of that. So you've been working back and forwards like that. Then you stop and you cast on stitches for the front neck opening. And from then on, you're going to knit the whole of the yoke in the round. And the whole of the yoke is everything that you see that's patterned. So you're working just like you would on a top-down circular yoke in the round, but instead of increasing a lot of stitches evenly in the round, which would turn it into a circular shape, you only increase in 4 places. So here in the front, and exactly the same on the back, and then on the top of the sleeve here, down there, and the same on the other sleeve. So only in those 4 places. And doing that turns the yoke into the shape of a square or a diamond, depending on how you see it. So for instance, if I was to flip the back up like this, you would see a big diamond shape with a hole in the middle. So you keep working the yoke all the way until everything has been finished like this, or all of the pattern section has been finished. And then if you were to put it on, it would be a little bit like having a poncho that's shaped in a diamond. And so then after that, to turn it into a sweater, you redivide your stitches into 4 new places, and you fill in all the gaps in stocking stitch using short rows. So once you've finished the whole yoke, you would have all of these the edges of the pattern, they would all be live stitches, and you would have them either on a spare yarn or on a needle, and you'd be working back and forward starting here between the front peak and the back peak, back and forward in stocking stitch. Every row is getting a little bit bigger, a little bit wider, because you're incorporating more of these stitches that were on hold along the edge of the pattern. So you do work down to that peak on the left side, work back down on the other side, and then when you've got it evenly like this, you continue to knit in the round. And you do the same thing for the sleeves. Now, if you're used to knitting a top-down circular yoke, and then you start doing this top-down diamond-shaped yoke, you might start thinking, wow, this is going to be massively too big for me. But you can see that the peaks of the diamond actually take up a large section of the front of the body and the back of the body, and a large section of the sleeves. So that's where some people have got a little bit confused. So here's a close-up picture of the underarms. On the right side, you can see the short row shaping for one side of the body, and on the left side is the underneath of one of the sleeves. So you start here in the middle at the narrowest part of the bridge and work with short rows in this direction to complete the sleeves. Then after completing the sleeves, you work with short rows in the other direction to complete the body. And what I really like is the way Natasha has got rid of a lot of potentially bulky fabric under the arms by decreasing really rapidly. I think you decrease something like 6 stitches every 4 rows. And it's a really elegant solution to what would have been a bad 80s fashion problem of having very bulky underarms. And it looks satisfyingly neat as well. By the way, this really beautiful cabled diamond pattern with little bobbles in the middle is Natasha's own invention. It's not taken from a stitch dictionary. So she needed to invent a stitch pattern that would transition out of this basket weave really beautifully and then transition back into the basket weave down here. I think she's done such a clever job with it. And I'm always impressed when a designer invents their own stitch pattern instead of using a stitch dictionary, because that shows another level of expertise. So the yarns, I think you could use a lot of different types of yarns with this design. You could use a linen, silk or cotton blend for summer, or wool for winter. Natasha used a pure silk, and her holes on the basket weave part of it are a little bit bigger than mine, and the whole garment has a bit more drape. I used the Durerum Natura Albertine, which is a fingering weight yarn, and it's 90% Falklands Merino and 10% silk. So mine's got more memory. The holes are smaller, and it's a little less drapey. I bought this yarn when I was in Australia with Mum, and I've told you this already, but she was the one who convinced me to go for this neutral colour. And it does go with everything in my wardrobe, and it does look really good, and I am very happy with it. But I think it would look even better if it was in a really rich, vibrant colour. And I did one modification with it, and that's on the neckline. So here's Natasha modelling the original version, and you can see she's picked up stitches and knitted a 1x1 ribbing around the neck. But when I tried mine on, I just loved the way it looked without any ribbing, so I did an I-cord bind off instead. And I think both options look really good, but doing the ribbing can fill in the gaps if you don't want too much neck exposed. So that's me done. I'm not putting this back on because it is so hot. Yeah. But we're still on Bring and Brag for you.
With me? So if you've watched our travel vlog, you'll know that I've been working on the Upwards top by Lily Kate France. It's actually knitted top down, which got me a bit confused about the name first. But Lily, I think her argument was it's the upwards top because it gets slimmer towards the top, and these straps here do point towards your face. So there's some thought behind the name.
The whole thing, I think, is going
it leads
upwards.
your eyes towards the heavens.
Yeah.
So before we left for our trip, I saw Lily post a picture of her upwards top on Instagram, and I thought this is the perfect travel project because it's mostly stocking stitch and it's a summer top, so you'll knit it up faster. It did turn out that she hadn't yet published the pattern, but she was really sweet and she sent it to me in advance, which was great. Yeah.
It's too hot for you to wear this today.
Yeah, it is. What is it?
But it looks really
32
cute on you.
degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we actually met Lily when we were in Yorkshire, which was nice. We went hiking together. She was very chatty and friendly. And I'm quite impressed with her. I think she has a very good work ethic and she's very conscientious because she always tried to get back to her test knitters who messaged her with questions, even while we were hiking.
Yeah. She was really conscientious in the pub as well. Afterwards we went to the pub and had dinner, and you were really tired, weren't you?
Mm-hmm.
Normally when Madeline has a new pattern, I will go through and read it with her and just explain anything that she may not have come across.
Yeah.
But you wanted to do it completely
I wanted
independently.
to be a big girl. So I wanted to do everything by myself. But at times I'd get confused because I was just tired, and I'm not actually used to reading patterns by myself. I'm embarrassed to admit. So when I'd sit there and suddenly look a bit confused and start muttering to myself.
Poor Lily, she was really worried that she'd done the pattern wrong, but of course the pattern's really well written.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so
the pattern is knitted in fingering weight or 4-ply yarn, and it has a main colour for the body and a contrast colour for the edging. So for the main colour I used the speckled peachy yarn, which is the Merino Single by Quing Fibre. I think that's how you pronounce them. And the contrast colour is actually some leftover yarn from Mum's Tegna by Caitlin Hunter, which she knitted quite a while back.
Yeah. A couple of years.
Gosh. So I'm not used to knitting with speckled yarn. I do usually prefer plain or heathered yarn to anything else, but I do think that speckled yarn goes particularly well with a simple design like this.
Yeah, looks great.
Yeah. Now a nice highlight of this top is the keyhole. You can actually wear it on the front or the back as long as you don't include bust darts. I definitely don't need bust darts because I'm pretty flat-chested, but if you do include them, you have to decide which side you want the keyhole to be on in advance. And I also like the I-cord edging, which is knitted in the contrast colour. So it goes around the armholes and the keyhole. And Lily also includes a cute little tie above the keyhole. Now for the I-cord edging, the pattern does recommend you use double-pointed needles. I didn't have any while we were travelling, so I used my circular needles and did the magic loop technique. That worked really well. But it was very time consuming. I reckon it would have been way faster with DPNs.
Of course, because you've got 4 stitches.
Yeah.
That's your row, and then you have to slide
them
it to the end.
All the round to the other end of the needle.
Yeah.
Pull the yarn around the front and knit it again, and then slide it again. And you do that for quite a lot of I-cord edging, as you can see.
Yeah.
So I think it was successful, but it was a bit frustrating. Yeah. And I also had a little bit of difficulty matching the length of the strips, the arm strips, is that how you call them? Straps towards the end. Because Mum was too busy to help me at that time. But I was super impatient. I wanted to have the top done so I could wear it. And
the side's a little bit bigger, isn't it?
That's right. One of them is a bit longer than the other, and so the top looks a little bit skewed. I keep needing to...
But I think we can finish that. Like fix it up. You just tuck it in a little bit more and sew it a bit more.
I'm going to let you do that.
Okay.
And the gauge is 24 stitches to 36 rows, which is a bit looser than my natural gauge. So I think if I knit this top again, I might go down a needle size because I like a very dense fabric, and that way I can make sure it's not see-through. Yes, and at the same time I would need to knit a larger top size though, so that the top still fits me. It's not too small on me.
Okay.
Because knitting at a smaller gauge does use up more yarn, I would probably have to buy an extra skein of yarn, because the great thing with this was when I stuck with the recommended gauge, I only needed a single yarn to knit the whole top.
Yeah, a single skein.
Yes.
Yes.
I said a single yarn. That's wrong. A single skein.
Yeah,
anyway.
So for the smaller sizes, it's a fantastic project to use up one of your speckled single skein yarns that you've just got hanging around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks great.
Thank you.
I love it. I think you look fantastic on it.
Well, I really enjoyed knitting a summer top. I haven't done that before. And it was very satisfying to have a project done in such a short amount of time. I think it was within 3 weeks.
When we were travelling.
Yeah. And our last stop in the UK was Hastings, which is a gorgeous seaside town. And we took the opportunity to film ourselves there in different areas.
So you're wearing your upwards top and I'm wearing the Corbis sweater. Mm-hmm. And that's coming up now.
Yeah.
Volare, oh, cantare, oh, let's fly way up to the clouds, away from the maddening crowds. We can sing in the glow of a star that I know of, where lovers enjoy peace of mind. Let us leave the confusion and all this illusion behind. Just like birds of a feather, a rainbow together we'll find. Volare, oh, e cantare, oh. No wonder my happy heart sings. Your love has given me wings. Penso che io sogno così non ritorni mai più. Mi dipinge con le mani e la faccia di blu. Poi d'improvviso tenido dal vento rapito e incominciavo a volare nel cielo infinito. Volare, oh, oh, e cantare, oh, nel blu dipinto di blu. Che dici di stare lassù? E volavo, venice punalte del sole con coro più su, mentre molto pian piano sparivo lontano laggiù. Una musica dolce suonare soltanto per me. Volare, oh, e cantare, oh, no wonder my happy heart sings. Your love has given me wings. Nel blu dipinto di blu, venite di stare lassù. Nel blu dipinto di blu.
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed seeing Hastings. Look at us, by the way. We're both using the same yarn, but we're not going to tell you about it yet.
You'll get to know that next episode.
Yes, we've just got such a full program today, but I've just made a mistake too, so I have to backpick. Hastings was such a wonderful little seaside town. We both really enjoyed staying there for the time that we were there doing interviews. It overlooks the English Channel and it's really popular for various sporting and cultural events, but you might also know it in connection to the famous Battle of Hastings in 1066, which changed the course of English history. Or you might also know it if you're a fan of the British detective television series.
Foyle's War.
We're huge fans of that series.
Yeah.
We've watched it quite a few times, haven't
Yeah.
we? And that was set during World War II in Hastings. And I know my mum, who's also a big fan of the series, would really enjoy seeing Detective Foyle's house. So here it is for Mum and all the other fans of Foyle's War. It's a Grade 2 listed period house and it was literally just around the corner in the same street as where we were staying in Hastings in our Airbnb. And just so that you can compare, here's a quick bit of footage of the house from the television series. So you can see the house has just been stripped of any modern features like real estate signs. And also, where we filmed Madeline in her upwards top was here around the net sheds on the front beach in Hastings. And there's around 50 unique looking black wooden sheds standing in rows on the shingle beach. And they were previously used by the fishermen to store their nets. And in the very first episode of Foyle's War, which is called The German Woman, there's a chase scene around these black wooden sheds, and Sam ends up stopping the criminal with the lid of a garbage can. It's really quite a funny scene, and it's where everyone first falls in love with Sam's bright, cheerful, and slightly clumsy personality. Now, just one last point of interest. Hastings has many small alleyways joining all the narrow streets, and the local name for these alleyways is Twittons. And this is the Twitton that led up to the Airbnb where we were staying in. And just imagine how awkward it was for us, because we had to carry 5 suitcases of clothes and filming equipment up here because we had to park our car quite a long way away. And here I'm walking in the same Twitton but in the opposite direction, which leads out onto the street. So that's enough trivialities about Hastings. Coming up now is part 1 of our feature interview with Georgia Farrell. Welcome to Fruity Knitting. So I'm here with Georgia Farrell, who is a British designer with a passion for creating architecturally inspired designs. And Georgia's designs have been heavily featured in the Rowan's magazines, and there's a lot of excitement there about her talent as a young upcoming designer. So today we're in Georgia's design studio, which is on the Highlands Estate in Chelmsford. And the Highlands Estate, by the way, is rather beautiful, so I do hope to get some footage to show you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. So it's great to have you on Fruity Knitting.
Oh, thank you for coming here. It's wonderful.
Good.
I'm really enjoying it.
Good. Okay, so you graduated with a degree in textile design.
I did.
And you're one of Rowan's main designers now. So what did you learn in your degree that has been proven to be invaluable to you now as a hand knitting designer? And is there anything that your degree really didn't prepare you for in your present work?
Okay, yeah, good question. So I would say, well, I always say that the biggest thing I got out of my time studying was time to experiment, to play, to explore and to fail in a kind of safe environment and learn from it. But there was obviously a lot more that I did actually learn than that. So it was quite a pure textile design course. So we spent a lot of time swatching. Endless days. So our tutor would teach us a new technique, and then I would think of it like as in interrogating that technique. So you'd go off and they'd say, make 20 swatches and come back when you've done it. And you think, well, what happens when I change the scale? What happens when I change the frequency, maybe of twisting and cabling stitches? What happens when I repeat something? What happens when I add texture and colour and 3-dimension? And, really explore and see this one technique, how far it can go. So there was a lot of that, a lot of exploration and swatching, but I learned a lot of design skills as well. So how to create a narrative for your collection, a story behind it, how to create concept boards, which are a really great tool for communicating your ideas to potential clients, how to present your work well, how to be critical about your design. That was a massive part of what we did. We would have like weekly crit sessions where we would have to present our work and, we would be asked questions and you would have to kind of justify yourself, or maybe it would get you to think more widely about your design instead of maybe just going down the first avenue. It was really great to then be like, well, hang on a sec, where else can I take this? Something I really wanted to get out of my time studying, I felt like I had this real longing for figuring out kind of what I was passionate about and what inspired me. And yes, that was knitting, but that was kind of like the vehicle for me, and the kind of expression, but what was the purpose and the inspiration. And I think that kind of stemmed from interning. I spent I did a whole summer internship with a great designer called Brooke Roberts. She made incredible, very technical knitwear with industrial machines, and the kind of inspiration or the design aesthetic with her work was from brain scans. She was a radiographer. She worked in the NHS. Incredible woman to do that and run a design kind of at the same time. And so I really felt like I wanted a bit of that. When you're studying, you design, you get different briefs and you respond to different briefs, and one collection might be inspired by nature, but that didn't excite me. I remember I've actually found some of my mood boards from uni when I was thinking about this, and it didn't excite me, and I was looking for something that excited me. And I think that was about the same time that I really started to kind of fall in love with architecture and realise that it was, for me, something that was going to be a continual passion for me, particularly modern architecture. So in terms of what it didn't teach me how I took these fabric designs, these textile designs that I'd been working on, how to make them into a product. And that felt like a bit of a gap for me. We talked about it, what's its intended purpose, but how, it's intended for fashion, but how do I make the garments? It wasn't a fashion and textiles course, it was a textiles course. So although I did make garments, I really had to kind of find my own way through that. It wasn't something they didn't teach us pattern cutting or anything like that.
So you had to train yourself in that aspect?
Exactly. I found really interesting a lot of Japanese books about kind of pattern cutting that wasn't very, what's the word? It wasn't orthodox, it was a bit more unorthodox.
Okay, yeah.
So that was quite interesting, very geometric, and so I was really into that because I love maths. And I always think of architecture as like a everyday embodiment of geometry and maths that you can just walk around and see.
Yeah.
So I kind of had that connection and it worked. But I had to learn more about traditional garments and how they were constructed. After I graduated, I actually got a job with Rowan, working in Liberty of London, the department store, selling yarn, helping people with their patterns. And I had a small amount of hand knitting knowledge that I knitted from a child when my grandmother taught me. Really, that time was when I learned more about garments and how they're constructed, more about knitting techniques, and I got much more into it then. So there were gaps. Gaps in my knowledge, which is, when you think back, it's interesting to think critically back about your time studying.
Your course, yeah.
Exactly.
People do know of you or think of you as architecturally inspired, and so you like the lines and the shapes and the patterns of modernistic architecture, but is that challenging to actually translate into soft, flexible nature of knitting that then gets wrapped around the soft curves of a human body?
So I'd say yes and no. Yes, it's tricky in that I want to knit a triangle on it and I want to knit straight lines, and then suddenly as soon as they're knitted or you put them on a body, like you say,
they flop a bit.
Yeah, they flop, they become distorted. Shapes and patterns can become very distorted, and you can make a chart to knit like a triangle, either with ferrule or with texture, a triangle, but when you actually knit it, it's all steps, and so everything it's not that easy, like as you say, with the flexibility, but I think there's a lot of similarities between knitting and architecture. You build a knitted fabric stitch by stitch by stitch, row by row by row, and I kind of think of them as soft woolly bricks or building blocks. And
Lego.
Exactly. And it's just the way you build stitches and create patterns, and you've got travelling lines. Travelling cables can be really structural. They can echo kind of steel works and really structural elements of buildings. And there's this whole kind of, you know, I often look at bricks and the way that you can arrange bricks in different, you know, formations to create patterns. I look at that and I see moss stitch, or I see, you know, textured patterns and cables.
The knits and pearl stitches.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can look at buildings and almost see how I would knit it. So I definitely think that there's lots of parallels, and it's something I explore quite a lot in my collection, My London.
Yeah, which we've got here.
Yeah, so we can have a look at My London, and I've actually...
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I've got some pictures at the front here of some buildings. And so you can see some of the kind of the steel structural elements here that are quite, you know, they have a lot of presence in the building. And so then I would look at that and think maybe travelling cables would be a good way to interpret those kind of structural elements. Kind of deconstructed cables, they're less twisting but more travelling. You know, the staircase on this building here actually inspired this hat. So I don't know if I hold it this way, you can see I'm using the travelling cables and the texture to add depth and get this idea of three-dimensionality. You know, you've got the staircase running on the top and then you've got the ones running behind.
Yes.
So that's the inspiration behind that's my Fan Street hat from My London. So I'll pass that over. And this was inspired by a tower block on the Barbican estate. It's like a residential housing block, and it, you know, when you look at buildings on the corner and you get the perspective, this is what I was trying to recreate with this scarf. So we've got the straight columns here that are actually cabled to keep them straight because the fabric is running diagonally.
Okay, on a bias.
Exactly. And so that was the idea behind this piece, trying to recreate the idea of this long tower block and the idea of perspective, which is something I like to look at quite a lot in my designs.
Just very, very quickly,
yeah.
How have you done this? So that short road.
No, it's just
not.
like a increasing and decreasing
of course.
in the centre, and so that you've got the shaped fabric, and so at that point you then have to cable to keep the columns straight rather than to make them move. So that was quite an interesting figuring out how I was going to do that if I wanted the fabric to be on the bias like that, and how could I then have straight lines, and, you know, finding solutions to the problem.
Very clever. And that's quite subtle and elegant.
Exactly, and it's a nice, the narrowness and the length of the scarf kind of echoes the size and the scale of the building as well, which was quite a nice way to reflect that. So let me show you this. This is my Coleman Street wrap, and it's like a super scaled textured pattern, and it's all just worked in stocking stitch and reverse stocking stitch, which means it's reversible, which is great for big wraps like this. And so this was me thinking, I've got this pattern and it was inspired by this building that had a really three-dimensional kind of facade. And how did I flattened it to knit it, and we've got the different triangles here. It was almost like origami, that kind of feel.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, well, if I knit it small, it looks one way, but if I knit it really large, what happens? You know, playing with scale, that idea, you know, you've got an idea, but necessarily you don't need to do the first thing you think with it. You think, how can I make that better? How can I make that more interesting and change it? So by bringing the scale up, it gives a different feel to the piece, and you get these really nice... The lines become slightly crisper as well.
That's true.
Because you've got more stitches to play with. So yeah.
Okay, good.
And this is my Moorgate wrap, and I like to show this as a bit of an example of how you can get these real structural lines, and you can get nice crisp lines by making travelling cables. And the building, it was almost like it had like layers, and you'd peeled away one layer and there was another texture beneath. So they're really simple textures, and they're kind of like a grid formation with windows, and you know, but it's just this kind of interruption by this travelling cable that makes a really nice transition between the two simple textures that just makes it more interesting. It was a really cool building. Yeah. And I have a scarf as well in the collection as the wrap, but it looks so much more satisfying on the width of the wrap because you get that much greater.
Yeah, you do, don't you?
You get the two textures together in a much greater scale, and it's, so that's, you know, different ways that you can create the elements of the building through texture, through travelling cables. They're two of my kind of go-to techniques. This is my Broadgate tabard, and it's like full of texture, and it's layered texture. So you've got one textured pattern in the background that's just a knit purl pattern, but then you've got these single travelling cables that make it was like steel bracing almost on the outside of a building, but that was in front of glass facade of the building, so you can create that depth by using different techniques in combination. And
I'm really impressed, and I love the way these blocks here, you've got thin ones, a thick one, thin, thick and thick, like it's proportioned, but it's slightly off.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah, so it's not just a standard kind of grid, but it was more interesting than that, and it feels quite dynamic, and it has a lot of depth to it, and I think that's nice about that piece.
And this you just put on and tie on the sides.
Exactly.
For when you're too hot to wear sleeves.
Such a great accessory.
Tabards.
Yeah.
Okay, I know them as Dickies.
Oh, okay, that's really cool.
That's the old fashioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a false shirt.
Yes.
That you put on underneath a tuxedo.
That's brilliant.
That's great. I love that. Okay, so let's just quickly go back to your experience of working in the yarn department at Liberty. Did your interaction with customers back then influence the way you are designing now or writing patterns now?
Yeah, definitely. I think seeing the whole customer journey and experience from the other side is kind of invaluable. Especially I think when I'm putting together collections, and especially when I'm putting together books, there was often something I would hear quite a lot. People would look through books and and ah, but I only want to make one thing in the book, so why I don't really want to buy it just for one design. And in the world of digital downloads and Ravelry, which is amazing, but how do you sell a book? And so I'm really mindful when I put collections together that there's this story and there's this narrative throughout the collection. So this is Abstract, my latest book, so that there's a real theme to it. So if you like one garment, the likelihood is you're going to like another one, but without them being the same. I'm really mindful as well to put variety into the collection so that there's kind of big pieces, investment knits in time and
like
money.
Like the one behind you.
Exactly. A real investment in both senses. But there's quicker knits and lower cost knits, like Sleeveless Garment, which is a great, lower cost knit and a quick project. There's simpler projects, one or two that are quite accessible, and then there's one or two that are quite difficult, more challenging. And another thing when putting a book together that I always think about is what can we add that makes a book more than just the sum of the designs in the book. So I like to talk about the collection, show some of my experimental design process. Like we saw in my London as well, we put the architectural images in there, and it's been really fun for me to be able to do that. And all the feedback, it just creates conversation with knitters and with, other people who look at the book as well. It just adds interest, and so it's definitely been a real insight and something that I come back to myself and I ask myself when I'm designing, okay, what would they think if I was in store and I wasn't me, and they, what would they say?
And you were trying to sell the book.
Well, exactly. So.
Oh, I'm doing so many mistakes here. I'll have to leave it to afterwards to figure out what I've done wrong. So welcome back. Part 2 of our feature interview with Georgia Farrell is at the end of the program. And like I said, she shows us a lot of things that we can directly apply to our own knitting. And one of the books that she shows you in part 2 is this one here. And I immediately saw the value of it, so I bought a copy straight away because I want to show you in a little bit more detail. It's called A Dictionary of Colour Combinations, and it's a great collection of very interesting and sometimes even bizarre colour combinations. So the author is Sanzo Wada, and he lived from 1883 to 1967, and he was a Japanese artist, teacher, and costume and kimono designer. So Wada was ahead of his time in developing traditional and Western-influenced colour combinations, and his work helped to lay the foundations for contemporary colour research. So this little book offers 348 different colour combinations, and it's based on his original 6-volume work from the 1930s. So you've got groups of 4 colours and 3 colours and 2 colours. And at first glance, I just thought some of the colour combinations were really quite bizarre, but they do grow on you. And if you feel in a rut with colour, or you just need some guidance or inspiration, I think this book could be really good for you. It wasn't expensive, and I bought mine on Amazon. So we'd like to start a knit-along, a Georgia Farrell knit-along, where you can choose any of her patterns. Our knit-alongs have become rather relaxed affairs. There's no prizes, and the end date has become rather fudgy. But I think of them more as little forums that I can set up where knitters can have company and conversation when they're interested in a particular designer or a particular technique. And we don't start a knit-along for every guest on the show, but I do want to start one for Georgia Farrell. And we've had quite a few requests to start one for Marie Wallen, who we featured in the previous episode. So we have 2 new knit-alongs, which we're going to start, and they are held in the Fruity Knitting Ravelry group and over in the Patreon Community Forum, where Madeline is going to be in charge of that.
Yeah.
Now, we would also like to remind our viewers that producing Fruity Knitting is my full-time job, and Madeline has finally joined me full-time, which is fantastic. And we're totally dependent on the financial support of our patrons to produce Fruity Knitting. That's because we don't sell anything and we're not receiving money from advertising or sponsorship. So we do ask that if you are watching the show to please support our work by becoming a patron. And it is very easy to do that. It's easy and flexible, and you can pick your own level of support. So thank you for doing that. And as a thank you to our wonderful patrons who are making the production of Fruity Knitting possible, we have a patron discount from Rowan. Rowan is offering Fruity Knitting patrons a 25% discount off both the yarn and the patterns for Georgia's 2 books, My London and Abstract, when the yarn and the patterns are bought together from their online store. This is a really great limited offer just for our patrons. And the full details of this discount is held over, or you'll find over on the Patreon site. So thank you very much to Rowan.
So as most of you know, Mum and I spent June travelling around the UK to gather some more interviews for the show. And these trips are always special experiences to me. So it's a privilege for me to get to meet people who have established themselves in the knitting and crafting industry and who have a lot of skill and knowledge to share with people. I have knitted some nice designs in my life, but I don't yet consider myself a highly knowledgeable knitter. So during these trips, I can sometimes feel like a little fish in a big pond. And that's why I thought, why don't I talk about the big fish, little pond effect today?
It's our pop psychology segment.
Yeah, because I've studied psychology. So the big fish, little pond effect is mostly researched in educational psychology, but it can be applied to almost every area of life. A big pond is a highly competitive environment, while in a small pond you have very little competition. And a big fish is somebody who's at the top level within that environment, while a small fish is not. And the big fish, little pond effect shows that the way we perceive our own level of skill is influenced by how we perceive the average skill of the people around us. So for example, if you're the only one who knits in your family or circle of friends, then they're likely to be very impressed by a simple garter stitch scarf or a stocking stitch top. But at a knitting festival, you'll have knitters of all skill levels, and some of them will know very advanced and complicated techniques and be able to do all sorts of stuff. So if you're going to your first knitting festival and you know how to cast on and knit and purl and you've done some simple tops, then you might at first be taken aback a bit at the sight of all of those unknown techniques and possibly change your mind on how advanced of a knitter you are.
But you don't want to lose confidence.
Yeah, of course. But that changing your mind on your level of skill, that is the big fish, little pond effect, because you've gone from being a big fish in a little pond at home to being a little fish in a big pond at the knitting festival. And maybe that changed your identity as a knitter.
Yeah.
So obviously there is a strong appeal to being a big fish in a little pond because it does feel great
to
sort of
shine and be admired. That's
right.
what everybody likes.
Yeah, be admired for your skill. But I do think there's benefits to both, being a big fish and a little fish. And
okay, so let's start off with little fish.
yes, okay. So the little fish in a big pond, that has it makes sense to be a little fish in a big pond if your goal is to learn as much as possible.
As fast as possible.
Yeah, as fast as possible. Because then you want to surround yourself with knitters who are more advanced than you are. And that's also why people go to workshops, because you don't just learn a new technique, but hopefully you get challenged a bit to apply those techniques to maybe modify your garment, or maybe to use a colour that you normally wouldn't go for.
So to push you out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think some people can find it demoralising not to be one of the best, but I think as long as you're not overly self-critical and you compete against yourself, not others.
Yeah, that's really important.
A big pond can be a very stimulating and inspiring environment to be in. And I think Dad is a good example of someone who sort of went from being a big fish to a little fish when he switched arenas. So he was a very fast learner when it came to academic subjects. But then when he started knitting, he found he didn't really have a natural affinity to crafting. And he wasn't used to struggling with learning something new.
Yeah.
But he didn't really mind being a little fish.
No, he was very proud of his projects.
Yeah.
I thought they were fantastic.
Yeah.
And
But he
actually
did receive some comments from viewers saying that his knitting was mesmerisingly slow.
But he found that funny.
Yeah, he did
So
find that funny.
he was a good little fish in a big pond.
Yeah, I'd say he grew into a medium-sized fish over time.
Okay, so what about you?
Well, I frequently feel like a little fish in a big pond at the moment, particularly because now I'm starting to work with Mum full-time, and I have to develop a real variety of skills to be able to take over more of the fruit knitting workload. And although over time I am hoping to get better at, coming up with good content and interviewing people, and of course becoming a more skillful knitter, I'm not there yet. And sometimes it can be tough because Mum has to give me critical feedback. So as a little fish, you can't be too precious about your own ideas.
Yeah. Well, the way to get around that is just to be thinking, to feel like critical feedback is a gift.
Yes.
And it's there to get you to where you want to go faster. Like you want to learn these things faster, and someone's helping you to do that. Yeah.
Immediate criticism will lead you to be better in the long run. That's what I try to tell myself.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. But at the same time, of course, if you start to grow into a bigger fish, it does make sense to keep jumping into bigger pools as well, if you keep wanting to be stimulated and inspired.
Very good point.
Yes.
Big fish should keep jumping into bigger ponds.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about being a big fish?
Well,
What are
being
the
a big
benefits?
fish in a little pond can also challenge you, but in a different way. So when we interview designers, they will often tell me that they learn quite a lot from teaching others that are less advanced than they are.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll ask them a question about a topic they never really thought of or simply took for granted. And occasionally that can lead them to rethink the way they construct a design. So being a big fish is also demanding because you're the one that others come to for advice.
Or to fix problems.
That's right, or to fix problems, and they will expect you to lead the way.
Yeah. So they can keep you on your toes, can't it?
Yeah, so that's actually a good point. Being a big fish in a big pond will keep you way more on your toes than being a big fish in a little pond.
Yeah.
So there's a difference there as well.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
you want to aim to be a big fish in it, or what do you want to aim? You don't
I
need
don't
to aim
think
for
you-
anything. It's just
I think that's a
interesting.
very personal decision
Yeah.
actually, and also depends on what stage in life you're at.
Or what you're
you look for.
wanting.
Yeah.
But
But
if
and
you-
the area of life that you're
Yeah.
looking at. Anyway, you can go on and on. It's a very rich subject. But I have an example of when I was a big fish in a little pond and I thoroughly messed it up in a sense.
You gave out crappy advice.
Yes, I gave out crappy advice. So
Okay, let's hear it.
at university, I was the big fish when it came to knitting because none of my friends knitted. And then when my friend Annika wanted to knit a scarf for her boyfriend, she came to me for help. So I was the big fish. I still managed to give out some silly advice, but it did start off well. We started off by finding her some beautiful blue skeins of rowan brushed fleece, and we found the appropriate needles.
Yeah.
And I taught her how to cast on and knit and purl, and she learnt all of that very quickly. So then I said, why don't we find you an easy scarf pattern to follow? But she said, no, I want to keep it super simple. So I said, okay, you could knit each row, which would create a garter stitch, or you could knit one row and purl the next, and that creates stocking stitch. And personally, I prefer the look of stocking stitch. So she goes off and makes a scarf in stocking stitch. And then several rows in, she comes back to me and she says, look, my knitting's super neat, but I don't know how to stop the edges from curling in. And then I was mortified because I realized that stocking stitch will always do this. And it's probably the worst stitch pattern that you can recommend for a scarf.
Yeah.
So I felt so bad about that.
And so did she unpick it?
Well, I tried to convince her to unpick it and start again, but because the yarn's quite expensive, but she decided to keep going, and we did our best to make it flat by blocking it. I'm not sure how well that worked. I should, ask her. But anyway, that shows how being a big fish in a little pond does not always guarantee that you give out good advice.
So we're up to part 2 of our interview with Georgia Farrell, but first we have an announcement to make. The Prince Edward Island Fibre Festival in Canada has invited Madeline and I over to the festival to attend it and to cover it. And we're super excited about this. So they are paying for our airline tickets and some of our accommodation expenses, which makes it possible for us to go. On a personal level, we're really happy to go to Prince Edward Island because, as many of you know, it's the home of the classic children's book series Anne of Green Gables. And we have beautiful memories of Andrew reading out aloud the book Anne of Green Gables when we were on our family holidays at the farm, and you were about 8 years old.
Yeah.
So it's very special for us to go there in person. And also, it's the first time that a fibre festival has been on the island. So a lot of care and effort has been put into the preparation to make it a really world-class festival. And Prince Edward Island is a top tourist destination. So if you do decide to go and you decide to bring your partner, there's a lot of wonderful activities that your partner can really enjoy while you're indulging in everything to do with yarn and fibre crafts. So the festival runs from September 23rd to the 25th, and that's a Friday to a Sunday. And there will be a marketplace and workshops and lectures, and local entertainment has been arranged for the Friday night and the Saturday night. So on both nights, you will have a choice of either dinner and live music, which then turns into traditional set dancing, which sounds like a lot of fun, or songs, stories, and local island cuisine by the celebrated island chef and celebrated folk musician. So both events sound like a lot of fun. The festival has also organised 2 lounges where people can just hang out, relax more, have a drink, and get to know new people. So one of the lounges is called Sit, Sip and Stitch, so you can do exactly that. And a special festival drink has been created called Sip and Swirl, which is rhyming with knit and purl. And then the other lounge is the Fibre Fan Lounge, and that's where Madeline and I are going to be on the Saturday. So there you can have a light lunch and talk to us and ask us questions about the show. So if you are able to attend, we really look forward to meeting you and talking to you, particularly on the Saturday, because that's what we can do on that time. And during the Saturday, most other times we're going to be running around creating footage and covering the show for you. Yeah. So if you aren't able to attend the festival, you will see what the festival looks like and experience it in a way in our future episodes from the comfort of your own home, and maybe you'll be inspired to go the following year. So that's our announcement, and now it's the part 2 of our interview with Georgia Farrell, and we just want to thank you for spending time with us again. We've really enjoyed being with you. See you later.
Bye.
So how crucial is the creative preparation and research phase for you when you're designing a new collection? Like, how much energy are you putting into creating new mood boards or playing around with different concepts and things before you actually start the designing?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time doing that and a lot of energy, and for me it's really crucial to the success of the collection, or because it's the story, it's the narrative, it's the thing that people will gravitate towards. as well as the knitting. And so concept boards are something that I spend quite a lot of time making. It's a good exercise because it actually helps me solidify this kind of a very abstract idea that's in my head, that, you know, I know what I want it to look like, but how do I communicate that before I actually do the work of designing? So I would kind of do a lot of visual research. Maybe I've got this speck of an idea in my head of something it might be, and I'll start pulling together images. So this is the initial concept board for my collection Abstract, and you can see there's like magazine tear outs of like photography, of architecture, and there's some prints.
And very geometrical.
Very geometric. So I had this idea that because I couldn't go out and be around buildings, I wanted it to almost have a feel of, you know it's architecture, but it kind of could easily be a print or a drawing. It's very abstract. It's about the blocks of colour and the pattern and the texture, and it's less about the building, because I couldn't be around the buildings. And so it's this idea of like an aesthetic of architecture that I've seen in different crafts and different areas of design kind of popping up in this photography. I've actually got a book here that inspired me, initially called Urban Geometry. It's a really great book. Let's hold that up. And it just gave me this idea of looking at photography that did the same thing that I was thinking of doing, abstracting the architecture. So that was the initial kind of influence for the collection.
And did you send that to Rowan?
Yeah, so this is the kind of thing I would show them. We talk about what we wanted to do for the next season. I say I've got this kind of idea, and so this is the vehicle for it, to show them it. If they like it, great, and we can get going, which luckily was the case with Abstract. And so I went on to create quite broadly using like collage and painting, and so I was looking at how I could take bits of buildings that I liked and kind of create my own architectural landscapes or compositions out of these elements, and really kind of pick and mix, if you like.
Okay, so you can see these very big triangular sort of, I don't know how you describe them, and then you've got these tiny little stairs right next to it.
Exactly, so I was looking at proportion and scale, and again the idea of light and shade, and using 3-dimensional like origami to kind of create that, and thinking then how can I turn that into knitting afterwards. And
you've already got the colours that you kind of used here.
Yeah, so the colour palette actually isn't really reflected in my initial concept board, but it was something that I kind of was working on alongside the idea. I like to save bits of colour.
Yeah.
So if we show on the next board, I kind of had a box of, I'd been picking up bits of different colours, and I had a feeling that this was the kind of colour palette I wanted to create, with lots of really tonal, nuanced neutrals, with these kind of pops of colour in the form of the yellow and this lovely green, which is a K Facet colour. It's amazing. And these are my really initial swatches, and this is part of the concept rather than part of the design, because I'm not saying this is the design, I'm saying these are the kind of techniques I envisage I'll use, and it's kind of to test the concept. Does it work? Does it translate into knitting?
Yes.
What I've maybe looked at in other formats, in sketches, in
So
collage.
actually already here you've done a lot of work.
Yeah.
Because you can see that is looking really, really good, how you've got that sort of angular blocking of colour and that with this here. And so, that works. I'm going to incorporate that somewhere.
Exactly, yeah. And kind of testing the yarns as well. I thought I wanted to use these yarns, but do they work for the kind of stitch patterns I want to use, without going all the way down the road of fully swatching for the collection? So that's all part of the concept. So it's quite a lot of work and quite a lot of process that goes into it before I actually start designing anything solid. And so these are these are final swatches, just to show you how some of them are developed. Actually, if I put that one there, you can kind of see the initial idea was there, but I changed things from the initial swatch to the final swatch.
Yeah, so you've made them bigger, which makes them stand out a little bit more.
And then I added a different pattern on the other side.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how, this one also is very similar. but how I was using the two yarns held together, and actually I didn't like it in the end for that design. So even though the concept stayed, I changed the materials I was using, I changed the construction maybe. So it's really interesting to see that process and compare the final swatches.
I love this. This is so cool.
Yeah, this was a fun one because it was really combining the intarsia and the texture and all of the kind of elements, the embroidery and the duplicate stitch that I wanted to use in the collection, kind of in one design in that one. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And I actually think that you use colour in a really sophisticated way. So could you maybe give us a mini workshop on, for example, how you would use combinations of colours to create emphasis and volume?
Yeah, so I'm really appreciative of you saying that, because I used to be so unconfident with colour. When I was at university, my graduate collection was entirely grey and black, and my tutors despaired of me because I didn't feel like I had the confidence with colour. But now I approach colour in a really organic way. I like to think that I kind of absorb colour now, and it just, in everyday life, I might see maybe like an advert or something that's got two colours together and I love it, take a picture, store it away, looking at photography and art and fashion and craft. And so when I approach combining colours for a design, if we look at this, for example, this is my sweater dress plain from Abstract. There's several things that I think about. One of them is proportion. So there's 5 colours in this design, but they're not 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%, 20%. It's vastly different from that. So that's really important, because in a yarn shop you might pick up 5 balls of yarn, 5 colours, but proportion changes things.
Yes.
It's the proportion or the weight of the colour in the design as a whole. So that's something you need to think about. Then there's position. Where do the colours sit in the design? What colours do they sit next to, and what colours are they far away from? This is a great example. I did a little exercise when we were talking about this.
This is so cool, this exercise. I love it.
This is the original design. And you can see the swatch and the sketch, and it's really important because in the swatch I couldn't get the proportions right, so the sketch really helped with this. And what I did as an exercise for this interview, when I started thinking about how I put colours together, is I recoloured the design, but I didn't change any of the colours. I just moved them around in different combinations. And you can see how it really changes the design. When you put the dark colour at the bottom and the light colour at the top, and even if you keep everything else the same, it completely changes the garment, because the weight is all at the bottom and it feels really heavy, like it's pulling down, which I didn't like. I like the way when you put the dark colour at the top, it carries on down the sleeve in this design, and that makes it kind of envelop the centre, the kind of architectural landscape in the middle, and I really like that. When I have a light colour at the top and the bottom, a great proportion of the design of the garment is light, and again that completely changes things, and I wasn't so keen on it. But in the same way, I didn't like it when it was just too dark. I actually did quite like where this combination. I felt like out of all of the extra ones I did, that would be my next favourite.
Yeah, because there's just a little bit, like the dark is the accent, isn't it?
Exactly, and it works. And you've still got the slightly heavier colour at the top and the slightly lighter colour at the bottom. So for me, that still works. But I'm obviously was happy with the way I did it initially. But as an exercise, I found that really interesting to have to think like that. When I put colours together, I do lots of tonal kind of colours. I really like that. I think it is a great way to add depth to the design, especially when you're using texture, to use like tonal pairings. And I also think it's quite timeless and a classic kind of way to use colour. Another thing I like is pops of bright colour. So we're going to have a look at a couple of designs.
Excuse us here, we've got everything on our little table here, but we'll have a look at these. I'll hold them up.
So these are 2 designs from Abstract, and I wanted to show them together because One of them uses the bright colour, the yellow, as an accent, like a real colour pop. And it works really well with this tonal blue aqua kind of pairing. It's very light and airy, feels very fresh. And the yellow just adds that pop to help the garment, you know, brings the garment to life. But the bright colour doesn't always have to be just a pop or just the accent colour. It can be like the star of the show and it can be the main colour. But I swapped the kind of the contrast rib into a neutral, and that makes it more wearable, and it kind of just grounds the design of the garment.
Calms it down a bit.
Yeah, it calms it down enough. And so that was quite an interesting to look at them together like that, actually. So you
I
know,
love this one.
whether you like a lot of a bright colour or just a little bit of a bright colour, you know, there's ways that both can work. There's no right or wrong with it. It's just about how you put them together. And this colour combination, I have this great book, if anyone's into colour, it's called A Dictionary of Colour Combinations, and it's like a Japanese, it was an old Japanese book that it's made into a printed book now. And I didn't actually look at this when I did that, but now that I was flicking through it for today, I just realised that I've almost... very similar colour combination going on there, and it's a great tool if you're really stuck on colour. There's 2 colour combinations, 3 colour combinations, and
That's brilliant.
4 colour combinations, and it's just a really nice little thing, if nothing else. But it's a really great tool if you're not confident at putting colours together, or maybe you just want something to push you outside of your safe zone a little bit.
Absolutely.
So that's a great
you
tool.
Just hold that up. That's an excellent book.
Yeah, that
wow,
I like.
I want to get a copy of
that.
that.
I like to turn to it if I'm feeling in a rut with colour, and
or just to look at, because some of them are quite bizarre, and you think, that actually does work.
Yeah, and I've used them often in, like, if I was doing like an Instagram kind of graphic thing about an event or something, and it's amazing. You think, I'm not sure about that, and you do it, and you think, it just works. They just work. They're really great. So
okay, so what I think would be great, and I think the viewers would really appreciate this, would be if you could suggest some alternative colourways for a couple of the abstract designs.
yeah, sure, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to start with plain, the big sweater dress we've got here, and I've come up with a few different colourways, and there's 2 things I like to do if I was thinking of colouring up a design. I've got my sketches here, and what I've done is I've recoloured these using on my iPad, which is how I like to do my illustrations these days. So looking at different colour combinations, using the original as like a guide or a map to how I'm going to create a new colour combination if I want to keep the same look and feel. So for example, swapping a dark colour for another dark colour, just in a different kind of shade. So instead of the dark blue, we could have a dark purple or a dark red. And then looking at how the colours relate to each other. So this block is a much paler blue, but it's in the same kind of family. So think about that. If I've got a dark purple, maybe I want to go for a nice pale lilac or something there. Then we've got 2 very neutral shades, a light one at the bottom and a more of a mid-tone neutral here. Think about how you can use maybe a warm neutral if you prefer warm neutrals in there. And then we've got this one colour block here that kind of almost doesn't fit with the rest. It's a warmer neutral, it's a slightly pink when everything else is quite cool. And so think about that as being the kind of the one colour that is slightly different. Yeah. So I've done various different ways that you could do that with pen and paper, but another tool I like to use is yarn wrapping. So we can actually get the colours direct from the yarns, and maybe you've got some yarn in your stash and you want to test out whether it would work in a certain design. Just pieces of like mount board, and I just wrap with my yarn. But what I think is really useful is to think about what I was talking about before with proportion and position. And so I've created these yarn wraps in kind of pieces so that I can put them together and get not an exact match of the garment, but you can get a feel of more of the garment really quite easily and simply without having to knit up a swatch or anything like that. So I've got like a more saturated bright colourway here. I've kept the blue because I kind of see it like a sky. So I kept the blue, but I thought bringing it in more into an aqua tone and much lighter, but it's still really vivid at the top. And I've gone for pinks in the middle and this mustardy, greeny yellow as the kind of the off colour, the colour pop.
Right here, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that would be really fun. And kept the bottom quite neutral, but it's just a slightly greyer neutral than we've got there. And then this colourway is quite similar to the original, but I was trying to think of if you like warmer, more like browny, earthy tones rather than the cool kind of colours. By swapping the blue for this is more like a grey, a grey blue. And in the middle we've got these kind of lovely khaki greens and really earthy greens.
And those two go very well.
Yeah, so the salmon pink really sits really nicely with the more earthy tone. So it's a different, in a different kind of more yellow pink rather than a blue pink. So you can think about that matches into the kind of family of the more earthy colours a little bit more. And then in the sketches, we've got some more colour pops going on. And so that was a really fun
I really
design.
like that combination.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, so that's cool for that design. And I think this design will be quite popular.
So this is the design I've got here. It's called Lines, and it's a nice jacket that combines texture, travelling cables, and then you're using like intarsia on the cables so that they're coloured. And the way the design's coloured, you've got one main colour, obviously, and then you've got three contrast colours that are kind of like a tonal palette. So you've got a really pale grey blue, a mid-tone, and then a dark blue with this teal. And you've got one colour that really stands out. And I think that's what makes the garment and the design is this pop of this, I think it's called like Vaseline green or something. It's like this really...
It's minty, but it's very interesting.
It's so fresh and lovely. And when I was thinking about recolouring it, I was thinking about how it's not a million miles away from the blue kind of palette we've got, but it's kind of half a tone over. So you've gone in towards green. You've brought it towards green slightly more. So when I was recolouring the design, I thought about that. So I was doing a green colour palette, and the teal is quite a intense colour for a main colour, so I kept that with this beautiful green. And because this design combines the Kidzil K's and the felted tweed held together throughout, I wrapped the two together to give more of an idea of how they'll blend, and then I added the stripes on top to replicate the design, and I used tones of green, so the dark for the dark, a really pale for the pale, and then a slightly more neutral earthy green for the mid-tone. And then I went kind of half a tone over again to a yellow, kind of a really bright yellow that's almost a yellowy green. And how that, they still relate to each other, but it's that little bit different.
Yeah, it's like all of these are somewhat muted and that's clearer.
Exactly.
And same here, they're kind of muted and this is fresh, clear.
Yeah, and again I've done with the browns,
that's
the tones
gorgeous.
of reddy brown, and used this lovely orange as the colour pop there.
The neon.
Yeah. And so when I was doing this, I was using, the original as a map, but then I had, an idea that I wanted to do something completely different. And I really love this colour palette. So I thought, well, what if you just had the main colour as a really neutral colour and then had four different, distinct contrast colours that were quite bright and vivid. And I love it, and I think it would work really well, but you can see how it's different and it will change the feel of the design. So you have options when you change colours. You can almost replicate a design just in a different kind of
colour palette.
A colour palette that maybe suits you more, your wardrobe or whatever, or you can really change a design with your use of colour, and I think that's fascinating.
What's interesting here though is you've still got three colours which are fairly committed to in the same family.
Yeah.
So they all blend very well, and this one's like...
Yeah, there's got to be one. There's got to be one that stands out.
That's great. I think this should be really helpful to a lot of people because I think this, I'm only going on what I imagine, but I think this is a really wearable design, and I think a lot of people are going to look at it and go, I want that. And so you've got all these different possibilities.
Yeah, definitely.
If you want light and bright, or if you're like me, a green fan. That's fantastic. Okay, now there's just one more design here, which I think is so brilliant, and it's this vest, which is so gorgeous.
This is asymmetry, and it's basically, let's bring these in. It's
We have to just point this out at the bottom to
Oh,
people
yeah.
in case they haven't seen that.
It's asymmetric in about every way possible. The trims are mismatching. You've got asymmetric hemline. You've got, you know, different trims added in different positions. And then you've got the abstract colour blocks. And it's a fun design because you use the Kid Silk Haze, you just add it in with the felted tweed. And so when you're thinking about colour combinations, you need to think about how it's going to look with one main colour, but also how it's going to look with the other. And you still need that enough contrast. And that's what's really interesting. It's like the idea of like coloured glass or transparency. That's what I was thinking about when I was designing
It's so cool. It's such a sophisticated cool
thanks.
design, in my opinion. There's the back of it. Okay, so
So
what alternatives do we have?
I've done two alternatives that are kind of similar in a way, but just to show how they would work. So the main colours are two fairly neutral tones, and they are tonal. So that's something, if you want to keep the design the same feel, I went for an even lighter neutral, and I kept the top colour but made it the bottom colour this time, the darker of the two. And we've got this salmony pink, and this really nice, kind of like a really fresh blue that's not
sky
too
blue,
green. Yeah, like
yeah.
a sky blue, yeah. It's a really nice tone, especially with the felted tweed, because it picks up on the flecks that's throughout the colour palette. And then I've got a much more vivid colourway with this intense orange that's fantastic, and the aqua blue. And I wanted to just show you this, as in the yarn wraps, versus the colours of yarn that made it. And so you look at these colours, and like the orange and the blue are so dominant when you look at them like that. But when you look at the yarn wrap, it's totally different. And so by making the yarn wrap in a way that it sort of echoes the design, it really helps you to understand how the colours are going to work together in the final design, rather than just a ball of each colour next to each other.
Yeah, because it's all about proportion.
Exactly,
Isn't it?
it's so
it's all
important.
quite grey, and you've just got these as to lighten it up a bit.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
really nice to see how the orange will really stand out
Yeah.
against the greys, and then you've got one slightly more subtle colour block, which is something, I think the blue kind of, the contrast in the blue is slightly less than in the
Yes.
yellow, and so you can echo that in your colour choices too. So yeah, it was a really fun exercise for me to do, so I really hope that it will be useful.
I think it will be. I love that orange.
Yeah,
Look, I
me
also
too.
love this too. It's sort of soft and subtle and pretty. Very much.
Definitely.
Okay, that's great. Now, we have done quite a long interview because you have so much of interest to share with us. So we'll wrap it up with just one quick question, and that is, what are you working on now? So what's your latest collection?
Yeah, so I'm working on lots of new things at the moment, new collections with Rowan to come, but sadly I can't share any of that with you. But I'm working on a kind of capsule collection of interior designs of homeware pieces that I'm going to self-publish, which I'd love to share with you. And so it doesn't have, collection doesn't have a name or anything like that yet, but this is the sort of initial mood board. There's a slight feel of abstract about it with the kind of intarsia colour blocks that I really want to explore more after really enjoying working with them. And lots of texture and lots of strong lines and geometric patterns.
Totally.
Yeah, so I think this would be fun for homewares.
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. I'm interested to see what you do with them.
Definitely. So the colour palette is what really was the kind of initial start of the collection for me, and I think it would be really fun to combine different textures from different yarns, different fibres. We've got creative linen, so cotton and linen, we've got fuzzy brush fleece, we've got chunky big wool, and then the felted tweed, which is lovely, and the alpaca classic. So basically it's quite fun to be able to mix and match the yarns, but there's a cohesive colour palette there across the yarns.
Yeah.
Not every colour is in every yarn, but they sit really nicely together. And for me, the nice neutrals I think are really something I'm wanting to use more in my like single colour designs, because then they'll pair really nicely with the big, bold, colourful pieces.
Yeah.
So these are just some of my design boards, and this is all work in progress at the moment. So looking at doing some cushions and blankets. We're going to have big intarsia, kind of these architectural landscapes that, like we did with abstract, but for like a big blanket. This
That's
was actually,
interesting, yeah.
oh God, this was a fun it's a very simple idea for a cushion where the lines, they get less and less as you go through.
Yes.
But I really wanted to create quite distinct and clear rectangles, and the way I've done it in the end is to crochet this line on afterwards.
Yeah.
So we knit this way and then add this on,
Yeah.
and actually in the linen you get such a nice crisp kind of pattern, and it worked really well from my idea, how it translated really well.
Yes.
From what I'd seen in the buildings, and so it's this kind of aesthetic of architecture, this visual language that I really like, and I almost now feel like I don't just want to copy buildings, but I want to like build my own kind of buildings, as it were, out of the elements that I like, and so that's what I've been doing with these kind of like landscapes of so I would
Inspiration happening.
take like an element of the design, but instead of just knitting exactly how it looks, I'm thinking, well, I really like the idea of lines that go straight and then diagonal, straight and diagonal.
Yeah.
But what happens if they work their way across and then there's something else underneath?
Yes.
And then if, or again, what if that's moving as well, but in the other direction? And so you've got these a thicker kind of
Yes, I
columns
like
and
that.
cables, and then underneath you've got the same pattern in reverse but using a much narrower, and that kind of the contrast.
That does give it volume and emphasis.
Yes, exactly. So that would make a really nice blanket. So that's a really fun design. And then some really super chunky knitted cushions using the same idea of these kind of architectural landscapes, but how, we can pull 3 colours together and make a really fun quick knit, and bringing the texture in to the intarsia again just adds that extra layer of depth, and the kind of the light and shade. So it's the idea of shadows being cast by different elements, and it's quite fun because I draw these things and they're probably theoretically perspective wise not possible and it would never look like that, but I don't have to be an architect and I don't actually have to be able to build these things. I just need to knit them, so it doesn't really matter. I can have a lot of fun and just make these landscapes up in my head and then knit them. So
Well, I have just had so much fun today. I'm so impressed by just the way you go about designing, how much knowledge you've got, and how much sort of intensity you have to make something really original and new.
Thank you.
Coming from you,
Oh,
which is
that's-
really great.
That's so lovely of you to say, and I've really enjoyed having you come here to my studio and to talk to everyone, so
I think they're going to be thrilled.
yeah, great.
Okay, let's say goodbye to the audience.
Okay, bye.
Bye.